We spent the last year living out of this Prius, traveling around North America to complete a road trip of a lifetime.
We circumnavigated the entire continent, from the west coast of Canada to the southernmost tip of Mexico, all the way back up the eastern seaboard and back home.
And this is that story. So this is our 2012 Toyota Prius that we bought off of Facebook Marketplace.
Right now it's a pretty stock model. There's even seats in the back, which was not what it was like for this whole trip.
Chapter 1, Departure. Now, if you've never slept in a vehicle in your life, you know that sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable. So our first step with this journey was to remove the back seats and turn it into our bedroom.
Removing the seats gave us a ton of storage and also gave us a flat sleeping deck.
Along with this and a hitch-mounted storage system, as well as a tent that we would sleep in when we were in places for more than a couple of nights. And we had a pretty solid setup. And it was time to get out on the road. Okay, there it is. We're officially
On the road.
on the road.
On the road again.
No,
First time.
for the first time ever.
Just can't wait to be on the road for the first time.
Yeah, this is it. We, oh man, this is such a surreal,
It doesn't feel real.
doesn't feel real.
Our hope with this road trip was to complete a whole bunch of things on our bucket list, and we jokingly started calling it our pre-kids adventure.
So our journey began by leaving my parents' house and driving into Montana. And upon crossing the border, we had a rather unfortunate look into what it might look like to drive around in America. So, only a couple of hours after arriving in the United States, we have a citation to appear in municipal court in Whitefish, Montana.
You say we. Nope, you.
We went to have a quick swim here in Whitefish when we arrived. And when we were packing up the car and getting ready to go, they had locked all of the urinals that were in the parking lot. And so I, like an idiot, took a pee behind the car that was beside our car.
No one saw you except the police officer. Needless to say, this was a pretty rocky start to the trip. And for myself, it really shook my confidence in that, are we actually gonna live in this car for an entire year? If we're already getting tickets, what other things are on the horizon?
Not only was this a pretty negative first impression of our trip, but it also cost us a lot of time and money. And we actually do a full reaction to this video and a breakdown of what happened behind the scenes on our Patreon. If you want to see more kind of details of what happened there and reactions to other videos from this experience, you can go over there and check it out to get bonus content.
After dealing with the ticket, we were still in a really steep learning curve of how we were actually gonna live in the car. We had never boondocked like this before, and we're just trying to figure out what is our camp setup, where should we stay every night. It was quite an intense first start.
See, this is crazy though. Like, that guy just walked right by the car. Like, no idea. Like literally all night, all morning we're in here and nobody knows the difference.
Not disturbing anyone. I think that's the thing, right?
So this is what the car looks like in the morning. Looks a little cluttered, but not bad.
We did all of the hallmark things that van lifers do, like sleeping in Walmart parking lots and gas stations, even stealth camping in neighborhoods. And every time we seem to be making it as hard as physically possible for ourselves.
Before going on this trip, most of the camping that I had done had been at provincial parks, you know, like real campgrounds. So the idea of stealth camping in cities or even on national forest land was a totally new concept. I was pretty nervous a lot of the time that we were gonna wake up in the middle of the night to people knocking on the window.
So there's people outside. They literally just pulled up. They don't even know that we're in the car right now. God, dude, what the hell?
Well, that was not my best sleep.
But fortunately, the rest of our time in the western United States as we made our way towards Mexico was phenomenal.
Looking back at it now, this was one of the most spectacular sections of this trip. We ended up visiting 14 national parks, and that's not even scratching the surface of what is available along that entire coast.
We met some amazing people, got to spend time on the beaches of the West Coast, saw the amazing redwoods and Yosemite, and then we decided to make our way inland to Moab, Utah.
To get to Utah, we went on the loneliest highway in America, stayed at the lunar crater in the middle of Nevada, and then we went to Las Vegas.
We have decided that this is one place that we will definitely be returning to in the future just because of the absolute insane amount of things and places to go there.
This is truly absurd.
All right, I've been to a lot of viewpoints. We've seen a lot of parks on this trip. I have to say, the Grand Canyon is not overhyped.
Okay. Yes, that's good. That's good. What we should do is reenact for the video. Like, I'll go down.
Don't.
And then I'll be like,
Don't. Oh, no, I just like, no.
Oh.
And then we hit a major milestone that we had been thinking and preparing for literal months. Chapter 2, Mexico.
Crossing the border into Mexico was a fairly nerve-wracking experience. We had done a lot of preparation, we had read a lot of reviews, and we had done our homework to make sure that this went as smoothly as possible.
get the passports up, that's good.
Where am I going to?
Nobody's looking at us, they're just like, maybe just drive right through.
I don't know if he goes through.
I can't get our passports out the freaking...
You pull against...
No, it won't go. Did we just drive through the border? Like, where are we supposed to go right now?
But that didn't quite prepare us for the culture shock when we did arrive in Mexico itself. It was a lot busier to drive around, there was obviously a language barrier, and we were trying to get our bearings right as we had figured out how to do it in the US. Levi and I have traveled to a lot of different places around the world, but when it's your first time in a new country, there is still a lot to get used to. Some of the places we stayed at had sketchy toilets, to say the least, trying to figure out power and access to water, not to mention boondocking and whether or not we felt safe doing that. But one of the best decisions we made was taking language classes as soon as we arrived. It was a really wonderful way to get to know some amazing people and to feel a bit more comfortable in navigating the day-to-day. Looking back now, these language classes were vital for the rest of our trip moving forward.
This was especially relevant when my parents came down to visit us a couple of weeks later, who have no knowledge of Spanish whatsoever.
So you might think that us living in our Toyota Prius is a little eccentric, and maybe it is. But how weird would it be if we lived in our Toyota Prius and so did my parents? Good morning, Mom.
So our 2 Prius convoy made its way down through Baja and across one of the notorious ferries to the mainland. This road trip with my parents was kind of an unbelievable experience. I think since I had left home, there wasn't really a lot of opportunities for us to travel together, and so getting to do a full month on the road with my parents in Mexico was such a rewarding, if not challenging at times, experience. Eventually, my parents made their way back north to Canada, and Leah and I continued to go south towards the southernmost tip of the country. And along the way, we can say without a doubt, it was a roller coaster.
A lot of people warned us about the police and military presence in Mexico and the amount of checkpoints that you have to go through. So every time we approached one of those, we were pretty nervous and had to test out our pretty shaky Spanish.
So I am fairly sure that they're asking me for a bribe. He said that I should come in here and see if we have...
If we have money?
I don't know. Yeah, he's like asking us if we have USD, if we have Canadian money, and I'm just saying no. And I
think they're writing up the ticket now. I don't really know what's going on.
But the food and the locals that we met along the way were so amazing, so generous, so delicious. I guess I can say that about both things.
Of course, I got food poisoning at some point, which was one of the darkest chapters for me of this entire trip, and it affected me for weeks down the road. But we also got to spend time with our friends in Mexico. On multiple occasions, we had friends fly down from Canada to spend a week or two with us, and some of those memories are the ones that we are going to cherish for the rest of our lives.
We got stuck in a roadblock for over 6 hours and had to drive at night in Mexico.
We heard from the guy behind us, who apparently said that this blockade has been in place for over 24 hours as of this morning.
Yeah.
So people have been here over 30 hours at this point.
But we also found some of the most beautiful camping spots I have ever been to.
We had to spend Christmas in the rain in the back of our Prius, opening gifts that we had wrapped in our old socks. But a week or two later, we were enjoying some margaritas with Leah's parents, adventuring around Tulum together.
But shortly after that, our trip took a pretty dramatic change.
Chapter 3, Pregnant in a Prius.
While my parents were visiting, I was supposed to get my period, and by the time they left, I realized I was a week late.
Every day that Leah's parents were there, we were kind of wondering whether or not this was just some weird abnormality, and then we dropped them off at the airport, closed the door to this Prius, looked at each other. What's going on?
When we found out that I was pregnant, we were literally at the furthest point away from home. It would have taken us over 6,000 kilometers to drive directly back to the island, and we were only halfway through our trip.
This was quite literally the turning point in our trip. We turned around and we started making our way back to Canada. But of course, it wasn't without its challenges. Almost immediately, we backed into a pole and bent up our storage container. We had a number of police encounters, some of which got pretty stressful.
Not to mention the fact that I was in my first trimester and I'm trying to film and look upbeat and normal in all of our videos, and I felt like total ass most of that time.
And during this time, we are trying to enjoy ourselves in Mexico City, going to cooking classes, hanging out on the beach, like trying to make the most of this experience while also reckoning with the fact that we're gonna be parents probably, and you wanting to puke all the time.
Add the layer in that I was also teaching at the same time, so trying to find reliable Wi-Fi to Zoom and teach my classes, and trying not to let on to my students how nauseous I was feeling.
The peak of Leah's sickness happened while we visited a sex hotel in Monterrey, Mexico. Now, I want you to picture this sex hotel. It smells like cherry lube. There are pamphlets for sex toys in the room.
And hamburgers.
There is a strange sticky substance on the floor, and Leah spends the entire night puking in the toilet. But the very next day, we get up and we continue filming as we make our way to the America border.
Chapter 4, Heading Home. I think in my mind, I really thought that crossing the American border would just make everything better. And they didn't.
Now, as Canadians, we had this idea that in Texas, it would be warm. And in February, it is not.
We forgot that it's a desert, and deserts can be very cold. It was also a bit of a culture shock. Growing up on the west coast of Canada, Texas, it's a bit weird.
Texas was also where we needed to do our first round of medical care for this child. being that we were on the road and away from our family doctor, we didn't really have any way of getting an update as to whether or not our child was healthy at the time. And so we went about trying to find a way to get an ultrasound in Texas.
So, blood tests that need to get done, like blood type, blah, blah, blah. She's like, oh yeah, we can do all of those. It'll be $375. While we had told our families that I was pregnant, we weren't sharing that publicly. For me, it's knowing how common miscarriages are, especially with first pregnancies. So I was very stressed this whole time, on top of trying to navigate the American healthcare system. As a Canadian, I am so not used to talking about money as the first thing when seeking medical care, and trying to find access to a clinic that supports our values in Texas was very, very challenging. It's our kidney bean.
No, but love. Yeah, no, that's big news.
Yeah. That was so cool in there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. Yeah, just take my blood. Oh, is that the baby's heartbeat? That's cool. Yeah.
Oh, we did it, Dylan. That's a big step. It's
Yeah.
a big step.
It was around this time in the trip where I think we considered cutting it short the most. This was, I think, a breaking point. We talked about it often. We discussed the reality that if we needed to, we could get in the car and we could just drive directionally right across the country and go back home, and we would be home in a matter of days if we really needed to. And we didn't. We decided that instead of doing that, we would do some things to make our life a little bit more comfortable. While I was dying in that sex hotel in Mexico, Levi was being very thoughtful and booking a van for us to travel around in Texas. And I don't think I've ever loved him more. For many of you who followed the journey, this may have been some of the first hints that Leo was maybe pregnant or something, because we began testing out different, more bathroom-equipped vehicles in order to test out what we might travel in the future. It was also around this time that we started to have fun again. As I was entering the second trimester, I went from whining and feeling terrible to being like, oh, I'm feeling more and more like myself, and there's still some amazing things that I want to do before we go home. We got that second wind, and we were on our way home. We had wind in our sails, and this is one of my favorite parts of the trip. We went to New Orleans and checked out a swamp tour. We spent 2 amazing weeks in Florida, watching a rocket launch, swimming with manatees, and walking along beautiful beaches. We spent a week in an Airstream in Atlanta and went to Washington, D.C., and then capped it off with a visit to our friends in a container home in upstate New York before crossing the border back into Canada.
3 months?
3-4 months, yeah.
Yeah.
And this
Oh,
little
yeah.
car, yeah. No, we're pretty stoked to be back home.
Chapter 5, The Homecoming Tour.
Crossing the border into Canada was a sense of relief. This was really and truly a moment that we felt a weight lift off of our shoulders. We weren't in Mexico anymore. We weren't in the US where, a car accident could potentially indebt your entire family for the rest of time.
As well as our unborn child.
We were in Canada. We were home.
But while we were relieved that we were back in Canada, the reality is that Canada in April is still pretty cold. So we decided to switch things up a little bit.
We took a train from Toronto into Quebec to visit Montreal and Quebec City, and there we had a whole new appreciation for a very different part of our country.
This also kicked off our tour of visiting family across the country.
It was accidentally kind of the perfect way to cap off this trip. After so many months away, missing birthdays and kind of missing out on all of the lives that we care about deeply back home, we got to visit everyone individually as we made our way across the country.
But we decided to do this trip in comfort. This is where we got the Cruise Canada RV, and despite that meaning that both Levi and I had to drive a vehicle across the entire prairies, it was so nice to have a bathroom and an indoor place to cook.
But after thousands of Canadian kilometers, we dropped off the RV and made our way back home. Chapter 6. What's next?
Over the course of a year of living in the Prius, we drove over 25,000 kilometers. This poor car did not know what it had signed up for. We estimate that we spent at least 250 nights in the back of the Prius and averaged about 5.4 liters per 100 kilometers while we did it.
Now, maybe this is your first video that you've seen from this series. Well, you have 52 other videos in a playlist on this channel that you can follow along if you so choose. The full playlist will be down in the description of this video as well as on our homepage.
So what's next for us now that we are home and definitely pregnant?
So we actually already have a rig planned and in the works for our next big adventure. This one will be baby friendly and will have a bathroom.
Those were key requirements moving forward. But before we are able to hit the road with our new rig, we have a lot of work to do to get it roadworthy.
So yes, there will be a build series coming in the future of us testing out some skills that we do not yet have. Thank you so much for watching this, and if you were here for the whole series, thanks for being a part of the journey. It really wouldn't have been possible without you, and we're really excited to see what happens next. Kiddo and all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
P.S. The baby is not being named Prius.
No, we will, no.
It's not happening.
Or Kyle.